Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It sure feels like it's been a long time since I've done a video like this. And as many of you know or might not know, I permanently live in my 4Runner. So today the office is this nice shaded tree because it has been very hot here in Colorado. I know it doesn't look like Colorado, but this is Colorado. Anyways, if you're into conversions, living in your car, van life, or any of that stuff, be sure to subscribe. I'm going to have a video coming out that details the entire conversion. But for this video, I wanted to talk about the power system and how I power everything, including my fridge and all my electronics. And considering the conditions for photography have been pretty poor lately, I just thought, why not do it now? So with that said, let's jump in. A question that I get asked often is how I power everything being on the road. That's why I wanted to make this video, and that answer has actually changed when I did the conversion. Thus, this review is actually going to involve two units by Bluetti/Maxoak. They're the same company, just different names. We're going to be talking about the very practical AC50S, which is a 500 watt-hour battery that is less than $400. Alongside that, we'll also be talking about the AC200P, which is a 2,000 watt-hour battery that costs roughly $1,700 and serves my needs a little bit better considering I live in my car permanently. As always, for full transparency, this is not a paid review. However, I was given the AC200P in exchange for doing this review, so you could see that maybe that is kind of a payment. The AC50S, the 120 watt and 200 watt solar panels you'll see in this review were bought by me personally, and everything within this review is my opinion, and it will not be reviewed by Bluetti before posting it, and is 100% my honest opinion. So, with that out of the way, let's start with the 500 watt hour AC50S, which for the majority of people watching this is going to be really all that you need. I've had this thing for about 4 months, and honestly, it's been stellar. Without just restating the stat sheet, the important factors that I find are the 500 watt-hour capacity, the 300 watt-hour AC inverter, the fact that it uses 3C lithium batteries, and hugely important for me was the USB-C power delivery port. I can charge almost everything I use through USB-C, such as my laptop, my Fuji X-T4, and my GoPro. The list goes on. Many of the other brands at this wattage didn't offer that, thus that was a key factor for me in terms of what I wanted out of the ports. The main use of the battery was to run my fridge 24/7, and I could run it for close to 30 hours depending on the conditions without any recharge needed. Speaking of recharging, keeping this thing running was pretty practical. You can charge via a 12-volt outlet in your car or from a single solar panel. You can also charge via a wall charger, but that's obviously not something I had access to very often. What's nice is the solar panel and car charging plug into the same port. So in daily use, I could just unplug the car charger and plug in the solar panel when I set it up. One thing to note is that the car charging cable is pretty short. It's like this long, which is something I had to solve recently for my new setup by getting an extender. It's not a huge deal, but it's something you might need to consider if your battery isn't going to be close to a car charging port. Again, I don't want to restate what you can find on the product page, but I did want to go over the available ports really quickly and how I found them most useful. Anytime that you're using a battery generator, you want to avoid using the AC outlets as much as possible. So if you can power deliver something over DC, that's more practical. This is because batteries deliver power in direct current and just requires voltage modulation when using things via the USB-C port, the USB ports, or whatever DC ports you might have. When using the AC ports, you're losing a decent amount of energy via the DC to AC inverter. This is why having that USB-C port was so important for me, because it meant that I could charge my laptop and I didn't have to break out the little wall brick and waste energy. On top of that, practically everything that I can use that one USB-C cable. So I can plug in my laptop and just throw whatever else I need just whenever I need to charge stuff without really worrying. On top of that, it even modulates the wattage that it outputs. So it outputs 40 watts for my laptop or 15 watts for my X-T4 without having to change anything. And I do use the AC outlets for mainly my Canon batteries and my Mavic 2 Pro, and it does have a 300 watt inverter, which is fully capable of doing. If you need a little bit more high wattage though for AC devices, then what's up next might be for you. The AC200P has 4 times the capacity as the AC50S at 2,000 watt hours, and it uses lithium iron phosphate or LiFePO4 batteries. Without getting too technical, these batteries just have a longer lifespan. They don't degrade nearly as much from temperature changes and are generally safer for long-term use in varying environments. The cost is they have less wattage density, thus they just take up more space than the equivalent lithium-ion battery. Many of the amenities carry over from the smaller unit, with the bigger difference being the much larger AC inverter in this unit. A 2,000 watt inverter means that you can power basically any household item. 𝐒𝐤𝐚𝐫, the wonderful soul who did the build in the 4Runner, even used the battery off-grid with many of the power tools we needed to cut all of the wood, sand it down, and all of that stuff. This luxury also allows me to boil water with an electric tea kettle, which sounds silly, but not having to light anything on fire to make coffee or tea is a big deal living in a car. On top of that, it also gives me the option to use an electric heater when the time comes in the winter, which, as I'm sweating profusely, not something on my mind yet, but it is there. The interface for the AC200P is a bit more advanced and has a lot of smart reporting features and fail-safes built in. It uses a touch interface, which I'm not particularly in love with. Being able to see all the statistics, the input wattages, and errors is great, but I much prefer the tactile buttons for things like turning on the DC power rather than a touch interface. Secondly, there's no way to turn off the screen. It's always on, which seems a little inefficient if you're trying to conserve power, but it's mostly a huge inconvenience for someone who sleeps next to the battery. I might be the only person who does that, but it doesn't make sense to me that the screen doesn't turn off when it's not being used. I hope that they change that in the future. I've even emailed them and been like, hey, let me turn the screen off. Anyways, it's just a minor gripe. The AC200P has the same charging options as its smaller brother, but it does require a bit more solar input. I kind of found this out the hard way when I tried to use my 120 watt panel, and that wasn't enough to get it to start charging. Whoops, that is definitely my fault. I could have just read the manual. It does state that you need at least 35 volts to charge via solar, which means roughly 300 watts of solar, but it varies depending on the panels you have. Not a huge deal. It was definitely my own fault for not knowing that. So I just picked up a 200 watt panel to connect in series with my 120 watt panel. One annoyance in charging the unit is that you have to switch the input from solar to car when you shift between inputs via the interface. The smaller unit just accepted both inputs, but it's because it only accepted up to 120 watts, whereas this unit, the bigger unit, can take up to 700 watts. It's just an extra step that isn't the end of the world, but it makes sense considering the battery can handle such a wide range of charging options, so you just have to tell it what it's getting in, being put in, rather. For full transparency, I have not had the AC200P for as long as the other unit, but it has done everything that I've asked it to do outside of trying to charge off the wrong solar panel. So if you need something like running power tools or a 1700 watt tea kettle, that's for you. But for most of you, I think the AC50S is a much more affordable and practical option. I wanted to also briefly mention that you can use a plethora of solar panels with both of these units, as long as they use these MC4 connectors. Just make sure that you get solar panels that give the right stats. And I just stayed on brand and I bought their 120 and 200 watt panels, and so far they have served me quite well. They fold up really easily and compact, and they sit right behind my seat, and they're pretty easy to manage so far. Overall, both of these units do everything you'd want them to based on your needs. They are definitely a more affordable option than some of their competition, and even offer a few amenities such as USB-C ports that were highly important to someone like me. They have their quirks, but overall, nothing has been a deal breaker so far, so if you're looking for a power solution, be sure to take these into consideration. Thank you for watching. The sun is now on my face. It is really hot, so I will see you again next week. Later.